to Where I'm From, the podcast that proves no matter how far you go, you'll always keep a little piece of home with you. I'm Bill Meeks. Now, this week, my guest I'm really excited about is singer-songwriter Steven Page, and he's joining us to talk about where he's from, Scarborough, Toronto, Ontario. Now, let's take off to the Great White North. It's a beauty way to go. Now, you might know Steven Page as the former frontman of Barenaked Ladies. You know, the guy who goes,
"It's been 1 week since you looked at me, cocked your head to the side and said I'm angry. 5 days since you laughed at me, saying get that together, come back and see me. 3 days since the living room, I realized it's not my fault but couldn't tell you. Yesterday you've forgiven me, so no, sit back and wait till you say you're sorry."
Since leaving the band in 2009, Steve's produced solo albums like Page 1 and Heal Thyself Parts 1 and 2 from his current home in New York State. But Steve's artistic life got its first spark north of the border in Canada, specifically Scarborough, Ontario. Now, Scarborough is a district of Toronto, Ontario, known for the Scarborough Bluffs, the Toronto Zoo, and even a surreal sculpture garden. But everybody's experience with their hometown is different, so let's find out about Steve Scarborough. Welcome to the show, Steve. I did warn you before we hit record that I'm a huge Barenaked Ladies and Steven Page, obviously, fan. And so I'm probably going to be a little bit nervy-dervy the whole time today.
That's so much better than getting kind of like sneered at through the whole interview. Quite nice. Thank you.
Now, was growing up in Scarborough, was it a supportive environment for a young artist like yourself?
In a way, yes. I mean, Scarborough, just to give you a bit of a sense of what it was and maybe what it is now. I mean, Scarborough is the city of Toronto. It's got a small little geographic piece, and there were these outlying boroughs, just much like Manhattan and the 5 boroughs around it. There was the city of Toronto, and then there was Scarborough, East York, North York, the city of York, and Etobicoke. And they were called Metropolitan Toronto. And then in the mid-90s, they all got amalgamated into the city. So now they call at the time they called it the mega city. So Scarborough is now just an area of Toronto, but at the time it was its own city. Actually, when I was really small, it was just a town, I think. But back then in the 70s, it was, I mean, you remember Wayne's World?
Absolutely.
With Mike Myers and the kids playing road hockey, and that kind of like Bob and Doug McKenzie, guys with long hair and hockey sweaters. That was kind of what Scarborough was. It was very white. It was very kind of working class. People joked about it in Toronto. It was kind of cultureless is how they saw it. And for us, Barenaked Ladies, a lot of our thing was like, well, this is where we came from, and we're going to make fun of it, but from the inside, but also show that there's more to it than you think. So that, and it's changed significantly. Now, Scarborough is incredibly multicultural and better off because of it. You know, there's just, you see these thriving communities, from all over the world, bringing their food, their religion, their music, their culture, their educational ideas. And it's a real, active and exciting place where it seemed sleepy when I was a kid. For me to get downtown to downtown Toronto, there was a bus stop outside of my backyard, and I would get on the bus. It would take me, the Bellamy 9 bus would take me to Warden Station, which would probably about 45 minutes on the bus, and then you'd take the subway, 2 subways to get all the way downtown. So it could take you a few hours to get downtown, which was kind of, it felt like you were abandoned out in the wilderness. But as far as
close to where all the action is, but just far enough away for it to be a pain in the ass.
That's right. Like you're in another city. And of course you wouldn't want to admit to anybody you were from Scarborough. But as you're asking about, as a young artist, the Scarborough Board of Education, when it was its own Board of Education back then, had a fantastic music program and arts in general. Not just in the schools themselves. I took band and choir and stuff in school, and it was fine, but there were these citywide programs. So as long as you were part of your school's program, you could then audition to be part of an all-city band or orchestra, or in my case, choir. So when I was in grade 9, I auditioned for the Scarborough School's youth choir, and got in, and every Wednesday after school, we'd get on the bus, and on the TTC, the Toronto Transit Commission. We get on the bus and get up to Agincourt Collegiate, a different high school, different neighborhood of Scarborough, and
Mhm.
there'd be 110 kids from all over the city there to sing with this great choir director, Garth Allen, who just, I was never a sports person at all, and still not. So, but to me, the closest thing I can imagine is this is the closest thing you can imagine to being on a sports team, the sense of or like an elite sports team where we were all nobody. The difference is nobody would go back to their own high school the next day and talk about choir practice. It was kind of nothing anybody really bragged about. But we'd go there.
It was like the nerd shame.
That's right, the nerd fight club. And so we didn't talk about it outside of it. Sometimes I would make the mistake. I'd see someone from choir who was like a cool kid at school, and I'd say,
Mhm.
"Oh, when we next week at choir, can I get it?" And he'd be like, "Shh, oh God, buddy." But we would go there, and like he would yell at us, and just but basically work us up to develop this desire to create something excellent,
Mhm.
that something that was bigger than any of us individually. And because of that, like you kind of I never worked that hard. I never did anything where that was like it was that much hard work, but also that rewarding. And eventually we did like a concert tour of the UK when I was 15, and that was a huge
Mhm.
formative thing for me.
Oh, yeah.
But the other thing that the Scarborough Music Program did was they would have a summer camp at the end of the school year every year. They would have a 7-day camp and a 10-day camp. It was north of the city, about 2 hours at like what was a summer camp, but this was before their season started. And we would go there, and you'd be in, again, you would audition, be in a different band or orchestra or choir, depending on your skill set and skill level. And then there would be in the evenings, there would be faculty concerts. So you'd hear these professional musicians who were teaching, hear them get to do their thing. Then there would be, social stuff, whatever, school dances or, dances or concerts or whatever else. So it was this
Yeah.
great kind of social/musical situation where you're completely immersed in it for a couple of weeks. And I went there as a student. And then when I was in university, I went back and worked there as staff. So I was there for like the whole month of June. And that was where Ed Robertson and I first started playing together.
I was
So
just
without
about to
that,
ask you about that.
there you go. Yeah, without those opportunities, there's no way I would have ended up doing what I do.
So since we're talking about the music camp and stuff, like you said, Barenaked Ladies would have never existed if it hadn't been for that camp. So for the uninitiated, I mean, obviously I know the whole backstory 3 different ways, but why don't you tell people a little bit about how you and Ed sort of connected at that camp?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, I had a band in high school. Like Ed was a guy who was always playing in cover bands and stuff, and I knew him kind of from when I was in
Mhm.
grade 5 and he was in grade 4. And he always kind of scared me. He seemed like a tough kid, he was like wearing like whatever Rush t-shirt and always kind of looked kind of scruffy and kind of like, I don't know. He just had an air of being kind of, you know, the opposite of my very soft, quiet, and scared child. He had kind of confidence and cockiness and
Yeah, yeah.
and a roughness to him. So I stayed away. But I remember in high school watching him play in a cover band, and like I was one of the judges at a battle of bands. And they did they did Rush, and they did some of that kind of like what rock and prog kind of stuff. And then they also did like Peter Gabriel and Talking Heads, and it's like, oh, that's music I like. Um, I thought, oh, this guy's kind of well rounded. Well, fast forward a few months, and we were at music camp,
Mhm.
and I was sitting around with some people, and I was sitting by the fire or something, and Ed walks up, and he is playing one of the songs that I had recorded with my friend Jeff Pouncett. I had this group called Scary Movie Breakfast. It was myself and my friend Jeff, and the way we would do this was, some kids in high school when their parents go away for the weekend, they have a big party, and they get drunk, and they have 100 people over to the house, and
Mhm.
that kind of thing. What we would do instead when our parents would go away is we would rent a 4-track cassette recorder from the music store and get a bucket of KFC and make up songs and laugh and record them.
Is KFC good fuel for lyrics, or does it kind of like slow them down a little bit?
There is a built-in comedy with KFC. There's something I think the thing of 2 people with a bucket of chicken as a teenager for me seemed just hilarious. That's not for 2 people. Now as an adult, I'm like, "That's just for 1 person." But at the time, like, that's for, like, a whole bunch of people. Um, and just the idea of, like, "I'm gonna get some more chicken," would be like that would be humor for you. For us, that was, like, the funniest thing in the world.
Mhm.
Um, and we would record these songs and laugh and then, make duplicate tapes and send them, give them to friends who would then tape them for other friends. It was the era of the dual tape recorder.
Mhm.
So Ed, when at this music camp, came up and he was singing one of the songs from that tape, and I was like, "Holy crap, he knows this stuff."
What was the song, out of
I
curiosity?
don't remember which song it was. Probably, really don't know was probably what it was. That's because
Gotcha.
that's one of the Scary Movie Breakfast songs that Ed and I sang together. There was that. Lilac Girl was another one, which was a slightly later one.
Mhm.
Uh, so it was probably really don't know. But the thing was we started singing it together in harmony, which was a thing Jeff and I had struggled with a bit. And, for Ed and I, it was effortless, and our voices just kind of blended together perfectly. And, again, in not trying to be neither of us wanted to be too effusive about how excited we were by that. We would just pretended it was, "Yeah, it's just whatever, fine." And that was kind of the end of that for a little while.
Mhm.
Although, I certainly would have loved to have continued making more music with him, but, he had other projects on the go. He was getting ready to go away to university or something at that
Yeah.
point, and, we didn't know what was gonna happen. I saw him at a party that summer after camp, and we were talking and laughing, whatever, and I remember him saying, whatever, I was talking about how I had tickets to see Bob Dylan. I said, "Do you like Bob Dylan?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Oh, would you wanna go see him?" And he goes, "No." And I said, "Well, I've got tickets. I had a pair of tickets. I didn't have somebody to go with, but I just bought tickets in case, and hoped I'd find someone to go with me."
Mhm.
And I said, "I have tickets. I mean, I'll you don't have to pay me or anything." And he goes, "Well, yeah, okay, I guess." And so we went it was at the Canadian National Exhibition, the the CNE in Toronto, and, so it's like the equivalent of a state fair at that point. We walked around and ate, made each other eat the most disgusting foods possible and laughed and went on rides and stuff, and then went to the concert
Mhm.
afterwards. And, the concert was we were way in the back of this giant stadium, and it was my first Bob Dylan concert. I didn't realize that you wouldn't necessarily know what songs he was playing until it was just about finished.
Not even when you hear the lyrics coming from his mouth.
You can't hear the lyrics. The lyrics are inaudible. And, so we just kind of, like, just started talking and pretending we were like rock and roll critics from the, jaded rock and roll critics from the 60s or something,
Mhm.
boomers. And we were just making fun of baby boomer rock critics who believe that everything that they see or deem to be worthwhile is exactly that. So, we're talking about fake bands, but as if they were real. Like, a lot of people don't remember the first band on stage at Woodstock because the cameras weren't rolling yet. Was this band Barenaked Ladies? It was 2 guys with hip waders and singing songs about soup and whatever. And so we were laughing about all these different things. We had a bunch of different band names, and then fast forward a couple weeks, and Ed calls and says, I was telling you about that battle of the bands I was supposed to do with my cover band. They called and confirmed, and they said, "We're really counting on you guys." And I didn't have the heart to tell them that my cover band broke up, so I just told them we'd do it, but that the name had changed. So I told them we're called Barenaked Ladies. So do you want to be at Barenaked Ladies with me? And I was like, "You told them what?" And the joke name is like, "Okay, that's now the name." And we went and did this show, and it was down at the Toronto City Hall, so down in the big city.
Mhm. Mhm.
It was the city hall in front of, the plaza in front of the city hall, and we
If I
went
remember correctly, it's called Nathan Phillips Square?
You're right, because you'll see that show up in the history of the band only a few years later, quite a pivotal moment in the band. It played some major parts in the band's history.
Absolutely.
We went down there, and the whole plan was we were gonna, like, rehearse earlier in the week and stuff, maybe a few times, and then we never did. It was like, "Oh, I'm busy, I gotta do this," or "Don't feel like it." So we never rehearsed. We showed up at the place and went, "Okay, let's go into the stairwell in the parking garage, and we'll figure out what songs we know." They're like, "Do you know, I Walk the Line, Johnny Cash?" "Yeah, I know that." "Okay, let's do that." "Do you know, Wishing Well by Terence Trent D'Arby?" "Yeah, I know that." "Okay, let's try that." And we just did that and a few of the old Scary Movie breakfast songs and that kind of stuff. Psycho Killer, whatever. And so we said to the people there, "Okay, here's the deal. It's just two of us, and we think it might be better that we don't compete in the battle of the bands because it's a different thing. But maybe what we could do is we could go out and entertain in between the bands while they're setting up and tearing down. We can kind of like, entertain with a short set in between." They were like, "Yeah, sure, sounds good."
Less
So we went out.
pressure for you too, because everyone
Exactly.
can go out there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Oh my God, what am I going to do for the last five?
That's right. So we did a few kind of 5-minute sets of these things while the other bands were setting up and tearing down. And it also took all the pressure off us because we're like, we're not competing. We're just here goofing around.
Mhm.
And then we won the Battle of the Bands afterward, anyways. And the prize was like, I think it was like $200 or something like that, which was pretty good in 1988 for
Oh,
a couple of
absolutely. That could be
18-year-old
be
kids.
rent for some people in
That's right.
19.
But we also got to open for a band called the Razorbacks, who were a rockabilly band,
Mhm.
and they were awesome. Like we loved them anyways. We'd go see them whenever we could. But we opened for them at the Horseshoe Tavern in Toronto, and like that was a huge deal for us. I mean, it didn't get us anywhere, but the one thing that came from that was we thought, well, we can't change the name of the band now because if somebody was at Nathan Phillips Square or the Razorback show and they saw us, well then, what if they liked us and we change our names? They'll never find us.
Yeah, and if they're like, "Do you guys know that band that has the two nerdy guys?" I mean, in Toronto, they're probably gonna be running there's probably gonna be 7 or 8 options, easy.
That wasn't actually the case at the time. We may have created that, but at the time we were fairly unique that way. I think that was one of the things about the band that we really exploited as we went forward was that honestly at that point in Toronto music, I mean there were great bands, but most bands remember this was the era in music when um the U2 Joshua Tree album was out. Think about the
Mhm.
imaging on that, the black and white, stark, very serious, no one's looking at the camera or each other.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of things like leather vests and but there was that mixed with a kind of an earnest Americana kind of thing. So you had bands, I mean, the bands that I would see a lot were things like Andrew Cash or the Cowboy Junkies or Blue Rodeo or the Tragically Hip, all
Mhm.
great artists, but their image was not nerdy or goofy. It was kind of like it was as if it was like an extension of the band or something like that,
Mhm.
and had that
Kinda
rootsy
kind of elevated, like, above it a little bit.
a little bit the sense of
Yeah.
worldliness or a sense of like we have it figured out in a way, and
Mhm.
our image became the fact that we borrowed our mom's cars to come here from Scarborough, and we're going to go back to our mom's houses and go to sleep there tonight. And we realized that a
Mhm.
good portion of our audience was the same. And that
Mhm.
was, I think, refreshing and kind of exciting to them that people were kind of not only admitting it, but having fun with it. And that became a lot of what our image was in the early days was that we were barely even a band. That was always the way
Mhm.
we presented it. It was like, it's not a real band. Even then, as we started adding members, like Ed knew Jim and Andy Cregan from Music Camp as
Mhm.
well. He had played in their cover band that they had and was in the percussion section of the orchestra with Andy. And that he said, "Oh, we should get Jim and Andy to play with us for a show. And we'll call it our band, quote unquote." It'd be really funny, like for one set, reveal our bands. We had them come over to Ed's parents' basement where we were rehearsing, and they showed up, and we like started one song, and like right away, Ed and I looked at each other like, we can't go back. Like this is amazing. This is amazing. And then they sang, and we could do these 4-part harmonies and stuff. That
Mhm.
it was like there was no looking back at that point. But early on, we never imagined we'd have more than the two of us.
Are there any sort of like urban legends or big local mysteries or anything in Scarborough that were famous when you were growing up?
Oh, interesting. Let me think, because I'm sure there are. I mean, there's things about like what, schools that were haunted or that kind of thing, or parts of a
Mhm.
park were uh, in the song "Light Up My Room." Ed and
Mhm.
I sing about uh, whatever the ravine, the shopping cart in the ravine and stuff.
Foam on the creek, it's like popping ice cream.
That's
Sorry.
right. Oh, you're right, and that's it.
There's a shopping cart in the ravine. The foam on the creek is like popping ice cream. Field full of tires that is always on fire to light my way home.
So that's in my mind. That is actually behind the McDonald's at Markham and Progress. That we used to
Mm.
go through these ravines. Scarborough, a lot of Toronto is actually made up of a network of ravines that go through these
Mhm.
little rivulets, and so you go down to these hills and you explore as a kid, and you'd find like a shopping cart, or there was for the longest time there was a VW Beetle in just in the creek there. And we always, so yeah, of course, there were always, myths about people who lived down there and that kind of thing. We never saw them, of course, but yeah, you explore and you make up all kinds of stuff like that.
Somehow that always just made me feel good. I can put a spare bulb in my hand and light up my yarn.
And also that's also about kind of the, a lot of what we would have in Toronto too, growing up in Scarborough, were these hydro fields, is what we called them, because hydro is what they call electricity there, because it's largely or traditionally came from hydroelectric dams and stuff.
Mhm.
So the power company would be called Ontario Hydro or Toronto Hydro or whatever else. So a hydro field is just a field where the power lines go, and there'd be all these neighborhoods right under them or right next to them, and that's where Ed grew up. Um, so that song to me, like I picture Scarborough, but I think a lot of people think of, and I do too. I think it's hard to detach the video for Lovers in Dangerous Time from the song. Like they're so intertwined; they are the same thing. And for a lot of people, that was what got them into Barenaked Ladies. And that is essentially a tour of Scarborough. That video is us driving around Scarborough. I mean, it's funny, this stuff you couldn't see because we didn't have the right lenses, whatever else. They try and like zoom in at one point on the nuclear power plant, and you can't really see what it is because it's just they don't have a long enough lens for it.
Yeah.
But we still do it. But it's like, driving around through those hydro fields and strip malls and residential areas, and actually that the area at the end where we're dancing in the field is right next to what was A&A's Records in the Scarborough branch of that, where Ed once worked too. So that, to
Nice.
me, that song, even though it's not in the lyrics and we didn't write the song, to me it's still the most Scarborough of everything.
Back to, you and Ed sort of forming Barenaked Ladies. After you did that big concert out on the square and everything, you guys ended up joining a comedy band called Corky and the Juice Pigs and touring around Canada. What did that tour teach you about your native land of Canada, and what did it make you miss about Scarborough?
Yeah, so we were big fans of this group, Corky and the Juice Pigs. It was a trio, and they were comedy, but they were comedy and music, and incredibly high energy, and just hilarious. Like the easiest comparison would be like the Three Stooges meets the Ramones. Um, but it was so much more than that, and absurd and just amazing. We would, every chance we got, Ed and I would go see them. And one of the things we would do everywhere we went, we had our first cassette that we made was called Buck Naked, it was just the two of us. We would take this cassette to every show and try and give it to the artist, which just means like crushing against the stage and then trying to like hand them the tape at the end of the night. And
Hopefully they don't toss it after they get off stage.
well, I realize, now they probably did. But although we did send, like, we gave it to the Proclaimers, we were huge fans of, and we did actually hear from their manager at one point, like encouraging, which was really nice. It was exciting.
Yeah.
I remember trying to give it to Jonathan Richman once, and he was like, "No, I don't take tapes." That was that. But I remember giving it to Corky and the Juice Pigs, and then we'd see them again and say, like, "Have you listened to that tape yet?" And they would be like, yeah, actually, no, we haven't yet." But then eventually they did, and they said, "We're doing this tour across Canada. Would you like to come with us?" And of course we did. And that was like, we took a hiatus from university, or dropped out, because we never went back to do this tour. And we were 19, and it was, I'd been away from home before, but not in that kind of setting where you're expected to work. And the thing was, we were playing mostly like university comedy nights at their pubs and that kind of thing. And we weren't a comedy band. I mean, we were still saw ourselves as music with a sense of humor. And when you go up on stage at a comedy night, though, the audience is expecting a comedy group. So we had some audiences who did not like what we did, and probably for good reason. But that was like, that's what it taught us, was like, not every audience is the same. Do you want to earn their applause? And if you do, then you have to learn how to kind of like tune into the audience, and also how to pace your set list. All these kinds of things that we learned from Corky and the Juice Pigs. And we also did get a sense of like what the different cities across Canada were like, what their similarities, what their differences were, what their quirks were. And that's where a song like "Hello City," about our first time in Halifax, comes from. Hello, City. You found playing at this place. I love Halifax, but at that time, we were playing at this kind of place called the Lower Deck, which is kind of traditionally what they would have there would be like, Celtic folk music, sea shanties, that kind of thing, right on the water. It's a sailor's bar, like for real sailors. And, they had comedy night. So fine, people go there for comedy. They did not go there for us. I remember taking a picture on stage of the audience, getting it developed later, and not a single person in the picture was looking at the stage. It was a packed house. So we learned a lot from that.
Yeah, I suppose if nothing else, that teaches you that, once you play the worst gig of your life, any other gig that, even if it goes halfway right, feels a lot better, right?
Well, it's, that takes a long time, because I think that then worst gigs, like your definition of what a worst gig is, changes. It can be, I performed poorly and I'm angry at myself for that, or I wasn't respected by the person who paid me. Like, they put us in a shitty place backstage, or, an uncomfortable place on stage, or whatever. So you're upset about that, or the audience wasn't engaged. So you're upset about that, or you're upset with yourself for not being able to win them over. Now I feel like, I'm finally at a point where there almost isn't a bad gig. Like, it's, if there's a bad gig, it's fine. The fact that I get to do this outweighs that. But it takes you a while. It takes some years for most of us to get to that kind of zen point.
Okay, we're going to be back with more from Steve Page, but first, a word from our sponsor. Where I'm From is brought to you by Streann Studio. That's Streann Studio, the web app that puts you in charge of the live show. Streann Studio allows you to take your streaming game to the next level by allowing you to stream to multiple platforms at once. If you want to go to Twitch, if you want to go to YouTube, if you want to go to a website that isn't supported even, you can stream to all of those platforms at once, get feedback from your audience, and most importantly, it puts you in control of the show. Now, Streann Studio has several packages that work for just about any type of broadcast or podcaster. From the free plan, where you can stream with a watermark, all the way up to the gold plan, where you can have up to 8 guests. You can stream to as many social platforms as you want. You can get a web link to share your show with external audiences, and you can even get an iframe so you can embed your live stream show directly into your website. And most importantly, moving forward, I'm going to be using Streann Studio to produce this show, so you can see it live in action every week and see how well it works for me. Now, I want to thank Streann Studio for supporting where I'm from, and I encourage you to go there to check it out. The website address is streann.studio. That's STREANN.studio. It's a great app. I think you're going to love it. One thing I've always really liked about Barenaked Ladies' origin story is that you guys were kind of like a viral hit before there was an internet.
Sure.
Like, these kids who take off doing music on YouTube or TikTok or whatever. You guys had a very similar thing, but it was kind of a low tech. Why don't you tell people a little bit about MuchMusic and how that all kind of built up for you?
Sure. That's the thing. Like at the time, we would do anything we could in order to try to attract an audience. And it's, I don't know how we would have existed in this current time. Like the nice thing is, I'm sure we would have been all over the TikToks, etc., and social media, and really done some fun and creative stuff. However, at that time, there was almost nobody, especially outside of the punk rock world. There was almost nobody doing it themselves, whether it was their publicity, their distribution, it was like you were waiting for a record company and a manager to come along and say you're worthy of my work, and then they would
Yeah.
feed you into the machine. And we were like, we didn't want to wait for any machine. So for instance, we'd be playing a gig, and sometimes we played so much. Sometimes we would have 3 different gigs in one day, but we would play gigs every night of the week if we could. Just whether it was lunchtime at a community college pub, and then dinner, then it'd be opening for some bigger band at the Horseshoe, and then it'd be like a 11 o'clock set at some other bar. So we would do stuff like, okay, we're going to play at the Rivoli on Queen Street today, but I don't know if people know about that gig. So you know what we should do? We should set up in front of the place, and we'll just busk there for the afternoon.
Yeah.
And that's what we would do. Like we would just busk on the street to let people know that we were playing that night. That actually helped us later on. We went to South by Southwest. There used to be a Canadian showcase at South by Southwest. This would be in 91. And I remember applying to be in the showcase, and they rejected us and said no. And we were like, okay, well, we'll see you there. And we just got in a rented minivan and drove down there anyways, and then just busked on the street in front of the Canadian showcase. And then when one of the bands couldn't get across the border, they ran out and they're like, can you take over for this band who couldn't get across the border? And we ended up on the showcase anyways. And that was what
Opportunity.
exactly. We created the availability, which allowed for opportunities like that to happen. We would just be everywhere. So City TV, which was a local television station, but a kind of a very innovative local television station, and MuchMusic, which was the Canadian music TV channel, was an offshoot of City TV. They had a very kind of an open plan, an open concept studio for their broadcasts, and it was you could see all the people behind the scenes. It was just a very different way of doing stuff back then. And they had on the corner of their building a little video booth, kind of like your photo booth for when you get those 4 photo shots on a little little strip of paper, that kind of thing. So you'd put a loonie in, a Canadian $1 coin, and you had like 60 seconds to say your piece. And the point, they call it Speaker's Corner, and it was to it'd be like the editorial letters to the editor, and people would be like, what's with garbage pickup on Wednesdays or whatever, and but you'd get whatever other stuff. People would go and moon the camera
And pay for the privilege.
That's right. And then they would compile this stuff. Some of it they would put on the news that night or whatever else, but once a week they would have a show called Speaker's Corner, and it would be a compilation of kind of the best of the stuff they got. And we went in, and we said, well, why don't we just go in there? We'll record a cut down version of Be My Okono. The 5 of us will cram into this booth and we'll do that. So we went in and we said, hey, we're Barenaked Ladies and we're too cheap to make a music video. So here's our video.
Hi, we're Barenaked Ladies and we're a little too cheap to make our own video. So here you go. 1, 2, 3, go. If there's someone you can't live without, so, and if there's someone you can just shove out, you can be my Okono.
And we did this and sang it mostly a cappella. Ed plays guitar and didn't think any more of it. And we get a call from the people at MuchMusic and at Speaker's Corner. They're like, this is what we've been hoping someone would do. No one's done it before. This is amazing. We're going to show it on our show. But they got such a good response from it. They decided to actually put that video into rotation on MuchMusic next to, Michael Jackson and Madonna and whatever else. And there's this stupid thing. And then
a lot cheaper than the videos Madonna and Michael Jackson were putting out at the time.
Exactly. I mean, by hundreds of thousands of times. And, that got us into their studios and got us on their radar. And they realized that we were a kind of band who were happy to just be anywhere they wanted. There was another example, was the song Be My Okono. We had submitted, there's a radio station called CFNY, and part of their mandate, according to the CRTC, which is the Canadian version of like the FCC, part of their mandate was that they were supposed to invest a certain amount of money and airtime in nurturing new Canadian talent. So they had a talent contest every year where they would make a CD with the best songs submitted, and they would have a live showcase. Same thing where they came to us and they said, well, your song didn't make the actual cut, but we love it and we want to put it on as a bonus track. So we just need your master recording. And I didn't have the guts to tell them that they had the master recording, that we did it on a cassette in my basement, in my parents' basement. We're like, a 4-track cassette recorder, dubbed it onto cassette and sent them that. Well, I should have just said, well, that's it. But I didn't. So I went, okay, guys, we got to get some studio time. So then we got into a studio for the first time ever, recorded the song, totally different version of the song. And it's now done, with all this reverb and whatever else and multi-tracking in a studio. Yeah. And then I sent them the DAT, the digital tape of that. And they never said anything. They put it on this album as a bonus track. And it ended up becoming one of the biggest hits on that record. Like, they put it in rotation. It was top 20 or whatever on the station and so on. And then on the release date, when they were supposed to have this big showcase concert at a big club in Toronto, we just showed up and played out in front again. And again, that was the thing people remembered, was us busking out front, and ended up, having this big hit that really got us to the next level.
One thing that's always struck me about your music is that you have this sort of a thread of like a dark humor to it, which, isn't too surprising because there's a lot of comedy legends that have come from Scarborough, Toronto, like Mike Myers, The Kids in the Hall, etc. What do you think it was about the area in the late 80s, early 90s that made it such a fertile breeding ground for alternative comedians, musicians, and musical comedians, and every mix of that?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, Jim Carrey is from Scarborough as well, or spent time growing up there. I think for a lot of people, I think the ability to poke fun at ourselves is a Canadian trait. I think Scarborough, because of its slightly removed geography from the rest of the city, meant people stayed in and watched a lot of television. That's how I think a lot of people honed their crafts. And things like comedy and music and sport are ways to distinguish yourself from your peers at school and everywhere else. It's a way to separate yourself and to also entertain, but maybe it's a ticket out for a lot of people as well.
Yeah, it definitely was, for you guys and a couple of the other people I mentioned, just so much great art came out of there in the late 80s, early 90s. Was there a sense then that, you were bumping elbows with legends or soon to be legends? Or was it just like, we're all just a bunch of kids here practicing our art, having fun?
We didn't know anybody else from Scarborough. We knew them when we would go downtown to Toronto, and then you'd be like, "Oh, you like, whatever." So I know Mike Meyer's older brother, Paul, who I'm good friends with, and we opened for his band
Mhm.
a bunch and so on. And we're like, "Oh, you grew up in that area or whatever else." And like, you kind of like, it was almost like I was saying before, a bit of a secret. Um, and most of those guys, like Kids in the Hall, are a little bit older than us. So for us, like, they were definitely part of the same scene as us, part of the downtown, like, they played rock clubs as opposed to comedy clubs. Um, but they were
Mhm.
already like, when we started playing down there, they were already a big ticket in those clubs. So when we got to know them
Yeah.
better in the '90s, they were kind of at the top of their game, and because we had become successful as well, you end up kind of rubbing shoulders in a different way. Yeah. And I was gonna say about the Weeknd, for example, he's from Scarborough, and he's probably the biggest star ever to come from Scarborough. Um, but, you want
Mhm.
like, or, in our day too, it'd be like Maestro Fresh West was a rapper who was really big in Canada, and he was from Scarborough, and he'd rap about Scarborough places, and you'd be like, "He's talking about Scarborough." But, like, I have to stop if I ever met The Weeknd, I would have to, like, stop myself from kinda like going, "Hey, Scarborough." I'd have to wait for him. He, being the bigger star, would have to be the one to initiate the point and say Scarborough.
Yeah, and then you could engage with them on that level.
Exactly.
You probably feel a responsibility, right, to kind of like promote that area and give back to that area in your art when you're promoting your art, all that stuff. Where do you think that stems from?
I think part of it for us was, I mean, I don't feel that way necessarily now. I do feel grateful for the
Mhm.
time I had, but at the time, I felt like there was a Canadian. I mean, I hadn't fully figured it out, but Canadians really they like to identify other Canadians out in the world outside of Canada. It's one of these
Mhm.
things, and I'm Jewish too, and Jews do this all the time. Like, "Oh, did you know this actor was Jewish? This guy was Jewish?" And so to be, if there was someone who was Canadian and Jewish, like, that's like Leonard Cohen, that's perfect. But
That's your new best friend.
that's right. But so I think as a kid, you're always thinking about that stuff, but adults do it too. But there's always this sense we would have people stop us on the street and say, "Hey guys, love what you do. Stay Canadian." And it was almost like a threat. It was like, "You better stay Canadian. Don't go to LA." And I mean, even though the people like this don't, who say that stuff, they're big Neil Young fans. But for some
Mhm.
reason, me, don't you dare go to Los Angeles. Don't you dare follow your dreams. Keep your dreams small. It's a very weird thing. It's like, don't get too if you get big outside of Canada, we might just
Mhm.
disown you. And I think some of that comes from things like, I think, especially for our generation, when Gretzky got traded to Los Angeles in '88. It's the same year also when Ben Johnson got accused of cheating in the Olympics and lost his gold
Mhm.
medal. And I think those two things were hugely emotional things for Canadians in general. And I think they messed with the Canadian psyche. That Canadians became nervous that they would become somehow laughing stocks, or the thing that made them feel Canadian is all of a sudden
Mhm.
no longer Canadian. How do you reconcile that? And I think sometimes
Yeah.
Canadians overthink it. So I think we always
Mhm.
felt like if we won an award or whatever else, we had to go, "Hey, Canada, Scarborough," just to let everybody know that we hadn't changed.
And
Um,
so they didn't throw the full boxes of Kraft macaroni and cheese on stage when he came back.
that's right. And but I think now we realize that, like, it wasn't worth it. They'll turn on you anyways. There's nothing you can
Mhm.
do to make them not turn on you. When they want to, they will. but
Yeah, yeah.
we wanted people to, and the idea that we had of, let's show people we haven't changed, is kind
Mhm.
of is kind of bogus, because, like, you're allowed to change. I mean, be aware of where you came from and be grateful for that. But I encourage people to change. You don't have it all figured out when you're 20.
Oh, absolutely not. If I had to live by the decisions of my 20-year-old self, I'd be in a bad
Yeah,
place.
exactly. I think most of us would.
Drove downtown in the rain, 9:30 on a Tuesday night, just to check out the late night record shop.
So, you guys start Barenaked Ladies. You release that first big album, Gordon. One of the songs on that, I think, kind of ties back to your hometown a little bit, and that's Brian Wilson. You mention in it a late night record shop. Now, I'm a huge BNL nerd, so I know that references a record chain called Sam the Record Man. Why don't you tell people a little bit about that and why it was such a special place for you?
Well, by that point, my parents had moved to a northern suburb called Richmond Hill. And I'd left all of my Scarborough friends behind, was very, depressed about that and felt very alone. And going to school would take like a 20-minute walk to the bus stop, which was not great in the winter, and then take the bus. It took me a long time to get to school. So once I could drive, I would drove everywhere. And one of the things I would do is borrow my parents' car, my grandmother's car or something, and I'd drive downtown to downtown Toronto at the corner of Yonge and Gould Street. There were two big record stores. One was A&A's, and later became HMV, and Sam the Record Man. And it wasn't until years and years later, because I was always a huge record collector. I mean, for me, the place where I felt the most calm and the most at home, anywhere I went in the world, was always a record store. So wherever we toured across Canada or in the United States or in Japan or in the UK, like going to record stores was my place. Like that was my goal. That was the thing I wanted to do. It was even what I wanted to do when I'd go visit my grandmother in Florida or whatever, to go to, I'd like to go to the record store. So Sam the Record Man, which was 3 floors of records, was huge.
Wow.
I realized much later was one of the greatest record stores in the whole world. It was just a big part of kind of Toronto's music culture. And for us later on, once we'd actually recorded some of this stuff, we did the Yellow Tape, which was a 5-song demo that we had recorded, and started having some retail demand to be able to buy this thing. It ended up going gold in Canada, selling over almost 100,000 copies of this 5-song cassette. And that was largely thanks to Sam the Record Man. I also worked at a Sam the Record Man in a mall in Richmond Hill, where I was living as a later teen, which was, my dream come true, except it was in a mall store, which was a total bummer because A, all the records were expensive, and B, I wasn't allowed to play anything I wanted to play. It was basically just whatever the owner of the franchise let us play, which was like, the California Raisins, a Cocktail soundtrack.
Wait, so it was a little bit like, you're a big fan of McDonald's, then you get your first job at McDonald's, and you're like, I still respect a Quarter Pounder, but it's not my favorite anymore.
I think that's exactly like that, probably. Yes. It's also the days of like, you had to call in credit card authorizations. Like there was no automatic thing to do that. There were no modem lines or anything else. So you would, if there was a lull in sales, and be like, okay, you got to call in credit card authorizations, and like, so you'd have these handwritten credit card slips, and then have to call Visa, and then they go, yeah, that one's declined, but you can't do anything about it. The person's already left the store with the goods. Yeah, it's a different time. I feel nostalgic about that.
Okay, we'll wrap up here. We're going to do a little game I like to call
Hometown Hot Takes.
Hometown Hot Takes, where I give you sort of a this or that, and you have to give me a choice and why you chose it. Okay, these are Canadian landmarks, or Toronto landmarks. The CN Tower versus Nathan Phillips Square.
Oh, I'm gonna say CN Tower. Even though Nathan Phillips Square is important to us, CN Tower is quite spectacular.
Absolutely. One of the largest freestanding structures in North America, isn't it?
Right. It used to be the largest, and we would always make sure people knew that. But I mean, I remember it being constructed. It was exciting when I was a kid, watching it, be finished off. And then, my kids, when they were younger, they would be very excited to go up to the top. So, I have lots of good memories of that place.
Nice. Okay, MuchMusic versus MTV.
Oh, MuchMusic. Absolutely. My time on MTV as an artist was very limited. There was only a few songs that they showed on there. Although I do remember when I was living in Florida when I was 12, I babysat for this kid who had MTV in his house. We didn't have it at our house. And I got to watch Der Kommissar over and over again, which was pretty exciting. But MTV, or MuchMusic, I mean, rather, was so instrumental to both my taste and also my career. That, yeah, absolutely.
Poutine versus ketchup chips.
Oh, poutine, hands down. First of all, poutine is awesome. And back in the day, that was like one of those things on Ed's and my first tour. Like, you couldn't get poutine outside of Quebec. It didn't exist outside of Quebec. So you'd have to go to a place in Montreal and you'd get it and be like, oh my God, I'm eating poutine. That's so amazing. We would have fries and gravy. Fries with gravy was a thing you could get at any corner store, but not with the cheese curds. Now, of course, it's ubiquitous. But so it was special then. And also, I hate ketchup chips. I've
never had them.
Imagine you have a bottle of ketchup, like the old style glass bottle of ketchup in a diner, and you go through the diner and you just scrape off the dried bits from the top of the bottle into a bag of chips.
Ooh, that's not great.
No,
that's not great. And this is probably going to be a bit hard for you, but I thought it would be funny. Mike Myers versus Paul Myers. You mentioned Paul earlier.
Oh, yeah.
You guys were friends. He wrote the book about you guys.
That's right. Well, Mike, I mean, one of the things to think about with Mike is the fact that think of the number of catchphrases that man has invented that are part of still, whether they are, swing, do I make you horny, $1 billion, but they're like, we're not worthy. This thing that people still do, the bowing motion, that's all him. Like, and you could go through every one of his characters and probably pick out 7 different catchphrases that have been completely removed from the characters they were part of. That's ingenious. That is incredible. So I think he needs to have that respect. But Paul is my friend, and Paul's been an important part of my life. So I would choose Paul. Please
good answer. Ecumenical answer. Okay, Tim Hortons versus A&W.
I'm gonna say I'm gonna say A&W, even though I don't care about the root beer. It's too warm. Don't love it. I like the fact that Craig Northey, my partner in music, can get a veggie burger there. He can get a Beyond Meat burger that he enjoys. I don't love their food, but I like the fact that the quirky fact that it's so popular in Canada. And Tim Hortons, again, its ubiquitousness is what makes me upset, because often traveling in Canada, it's the one thing you can eat, and I don't want that.
Okay, and the last one here for you, Canadians are polite versus Canadians are sick of people assuming they're polite.
I don't think Canadians are sick of that. I think Canadians now are passive aggressive and want people to think they're polite, and I don't think they've earned that. I think they are losing that politeness.
They're coasting on their reputation.
Exactly right. That is right.
Hometown hot takes.
So you're in New York, right? Yeah, I'm in Syracuse area. I moved here about 12 years ago or so. This is where my wife Christine is from, and I never imagined I was going to live outside of Canada. Being Canadian is such a big part of my identity, both publicly, both part kind of the shtick of Barenaked Ladies. A lot of it was about being Canadian, and particularly
90% of what I know about Canada is from being a Barenaked Ladies fan. So
we do our best, and I think we always felt like we were being kind of judged, like Canadians were like, "Don't screw up." And then I screwed up, so I had to leave. It's not exactly what happened, but I came down here just because this is where Christine is from, and this is where our kids are, and so on. And at first, I just felt like if I was going to come to the United States, I always imagined I'd live in New York City or Los Angeles or something, some entertainment hub where I'd be there for work. But I've really gotten to know and like the place. I mean, obviously there are social and political things I disagree with, but there are tons of those up in Canada too. I've realized, there's a lot that I've learned from being a Canadian living outside of Canada, about kind of Canadians' own weird uh, kind of mixture of imposter syndrome, or this inferiority complex that they have, mixed with this grand superiority complex, which I find kind of annoying. Uh, so coming here, where I think most people know, hey, we're imperfect. It feels like there's some possibility here sometimes too. It's great because this is what, like, I guess what they call the Rust Belt. It's part of America along the
Mhm.
Great Lakes that has seen better days as far as the manufacturing and transportation hub that it once was. So it's kind of, you see all these cities along here trying to find new ways of existing, of raising money,
Mhm.
and you find a lot of kind of creative and interesting small businesses because of that, and new kinds of communities that pop up because of the affordability of real estate, or those kinds of things. uh, and it's actually quite an interesting and exciting place to live.
Well, I know that, with your work with Barenaked Ladies, you guys were never afraid to get political about local Canadian politics. I think of, like, the songs like, "You Will Be Waiting" and things like that. Does living in the States now make you feel like you have a bigger, opportunity to comment on American politics too, or at least the right to?
Well, in the song, White Noise, I say, I
Mhm,
had to learn to bite my tongue, or they'll send me back to where I came from, because there is that sense of, like, I'm here, I'm a guest. I have a
mhm.
green card, but I'm not a citizen. So there's a part of me that thinks, and that's, being Jewish and growing up in the shadow of the Holocaust, it always seemed like hyperbole. This idea of, like, well, if I make too much noise, they could send me home, or worse. And I thought that, maybe that was paranoid of me, and perhaps it was at a certain point in time. And now it seems like, come 2024, who knows? That could be, they could be rounding us all up and sending us elsewhere, or locking us down. Who knows? So it is. I feel like I have to tiptoe a little bit, and also just the way the world is now with social media. Everybody's opinions are so strong, and
Mhm.
also so everybody is so convinced that they're right, that it can get pretty frightening pretty quickly. Maybe I don't want to engage, so I try and save that now for the songs more than I do the uh, pithy quotes on Twitter or whatever.
Yeah, you'll get feedback from the songs, but it won't be 10,000 rage tweets directed in your
It
direction.
might be. I mean, I certainly see the stuff show up on my YouTube, but the thing is, the way people criticize you quite often is like, it's the way that they give Yelp reviews for restaurants. Like, they expect, like, customer service from the artist. Like, an artist is going to come back and say, "How do we earn your business? How much more right wing should I be in order to earn your business as a fan?" And, like, what those people don't seem to realize is, I don't care if they never listen to what I do again. It's okay. It's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah. Well, I will say that, coming on my show this week, you have definitely earned my continued business. You've had my business for the past, 20 years or so, but
That's good. See, that's what I'm here for.
that's how you build a fan base. Just go on a bunch of podcasts. Everybody has a podcast. Eventually, you'll hit them all.
Yep, one by one. I get people can just, "Oh, sure, I'll do your podcast. Just join my Patreon."
All right, Steve. Well, I want to thank you again for joining us today. It's been fantastic getting to talk to you. As I mentioned up at the top of the show, you're one of my heroes. I have your songs in my ears probably 70% of the time I'm listening to music. I know you've been doing a lot of these live from home live stream shows, starting with the pandemic and continuing on. Why don't you tell people how they can check those out?
Sure, if you come to stephenpage.com or check any of my social media stuff, you can see when the next live from home will be. There's at least one a month I try to do. Some
Mhm.
months there'll be multiple, and they're on Saturdays, on Zoom at 5 p.m. Eastern. And I usually go for a good 2+ hours. I play requests, I play hits, I play all the old stuff, I play covers. It's all over the place, and it's saved my life over the course of the pandemic, that's for sure.
And I'll say save my life too. Like, that was like when things were the darkest, like that was always a highlight, like getting in there to jump in and chat with fellow Stephen Page fans, listen to the music. Always so great. You have a new album coming out soon too, don't you?
Yeah, we're looking at the goal is to have it out September 29th. It's called Excelsior.
Mhm.
I hope you enjoy it. It's 11 brand new songs.
I
Very
guarantee
excited.
you it's all I'm going to be listening to for the rest of the year.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Steve.
Thanks, Bill.
Today I'm free, nothing can stop me. I have no limits, but the ones I set myself.
Now, it is early days for where I'm from here, so we don't have all of the socials and the emails and everything set up yet, but you can go ahead and feel free to email me, bill@billmeeks.com, with your reaction to Steve's stories about Scarborough, some stories about your hometown, or future people you'd like to see come on the show. Well, that does it for this week. Join me next week where I talk to somebody else about where they're from. I've been Bill Meeks. See you next time.